YouTube, what is good? So as of late, I've been in a pretty fortunate situation to where I've been able to try out some Leica cameras that I haven't been able to use in the past. Last week, we did a video about the M10, and today we get to talk about this Leica Q2, and we get to answer possibly the most popular question that I get on this YouTube channel, because y'all know I use a Leica Q all the time, basically in every video, and I rave about this thing, and everyone always is asking me, should I get a Q2 or should I get the standard Q used? Because there is a big price difference between these two cameras, be it one is on the used market and one is on the used market, but it's much newer. So the Q2 was released, when was that? At the end of 2019, I believe. You're gonna have to fact check me on most of the technical stuff in today's video, because y'all know I'm not a technical guy. I'm talking about practicality and which camera is for you and what makes sense. There's plenty of great videos and articles out there where they break down specs. I'm gonna briefly talk about them, but that's not really what this is about. It's more about the nuance between these two cameras and which one makes the most sense for you. What category do you fall in, Q2 or standard Q? So let's get into it. Before I talk more about this, I do want to take a brief second to thank the sponsor on today's video, Squarespace. So as photographers, we put so much time and energy into creating our craft, and one of the best ways to showcase your work is a website, and Squarespace is hooking you up today. Go to squarespace.com/EvanRamp to start a free trial, and you can use code EvanRamp to get 10% off your first purchase. Now, one of the most overwhelming parts about building a website is actually designing it. So what I've done is I created a video on this channel where, one, I break down how I built my site, and another video last month where I break down how I built a portfolio site. So in that video, I show exactly how you can build a portfolio regardless of what type of photography you do. Look how quick and simple it is. It's a couple steps. It probably take you about 10 minutes, but now you have a way for clients to see themselves as your work. A portfolio page is a huge part of a photography business, and if you're not into that, you can set up a website so clients can contact and book you. You can sell merchandise. I've sold my photo book through my Squarespace site, evanramp.com. Regardless of if you want to build an online store or build a portfolio, Squarespace keeps it simple, and that is what it's all about. You don't want your website to be a hassle. You want it to be something easy so you can get back out and start creating the work that you love. So with that said, you can go to squarespace.com, you can build yourself a trial website, and then when you're ready to launch your site, you can use code EvanRamp to get 10% off. And remember, there's two videos linked in the description of this video to help you all get started. One where I show exactly how I built my site, and one where I show y'all how to build that portfolio site. So thank you, Squarespace, for sponsoring the video. Sponsors like them make videos like this possible, where I can have the chance to test out other cameras. So first things first, the Q2 is double the resolution of the Q. Everyone knows that. This has megapixels in the 40s. This is like 24, which personally for me, I don't see anything wrong with 24, but obviously more is going to be better when it comes to resolution. You can crop more, you can do more with the files, and they look sharp and crispy as to be expected. The files coming out of this thing, they look fantastic. I made some quick test photos with it, and I was not disappointed whatsoever. Now, aside from that, there are some things you can do with video on the Q2 that you can't do on the Q. You can get 4K video on the Q2, and you can also get 1080 120, which I guess if you're trying to use this as a video camera occasionally, that is good to have, but I don't really know anyone who's like, yeah, I can't wait to pick up that Leica Q specifically for video. So that's kind of like a secondary thing, sort of like a cherry on top bonus. If you do occasionally dabble in video, it is cool to have 4K, so that's another plus, I guess, but I don't think it's a deal breaker whatsoever. Now, aside from that, one cool thing about having the added resolution on the Q2 is the fact that you can take advantage of the larger sensor, meaning on the Q, realistically, if I want to crop to what would be considered like a 35 focal length or a 50 focal length, I lose quite a bit of resolution. By the time I get to what would be considered 50, I'm down to like, what, 5 megapixels, 7 megapixels, something like that. Whereas on the Q2, you can get away with much more of a crop, and if you're shooting JPEG, you can hit this little button right here, you can punch in and you can get to 35, 50, and 75. But when you're at 75, I think your file comes out to be around 7 megapixels. So it's up to you to decide if you want that or not, but because you're getting more megapixels, you have more options as far as what you can do with the crops and compositions with this camera. Now, one big issue with that, you're still on a 28mm lens. So even though you're punching up to 50mm and taking advantage of this resolution, it's not a true 50. You're not going to get that same depth of field, that same bokeh, because it's still a 28mm lens. So that is something to keep in mind. I've always talked about how nice it would be to have the Q with a 35 or a 50 on it, and this does get you closer, but it's not the exact thing. Now, there are a few intangibles between these two cameras. One big thing that I like on the Q2 is the fact that when you turn the camera on, it's a simple on and off. Now, on the Q, you have your drive mode up here. So when you switch the camera on, you can go to S mode, which stands for single. And if you flip it again, you go to C mode, which is continuous, which drives me crazy. It happens all the time. This button doesn't have very much detent, I guess would be the word. So it can be easy to push onto this continuous mode and you end up making 3 photos. It's not the end of the world, but it is kind of like an annoying feature that I never understood why it was put onto this camera. Whereas on the Q2, they took care of that. Everyone probably complained and they took note of it and they just added a basic switch on there. Now with that basic switch, moving the drive mode to something else, your drive is now located in your menu, which gives you the ability to do continuous shooting on this camera. So you can do an interval timer, which is fantastic for someone like me who does a lot of YouTube videos. I have to make thumbnails of myself all the time. And also if you're someone out doing nature photography or you're doing time lapses and you might want to walk into a frame to add some depth to your image, it is nice to have that interval timer and it can just run photos over and over. And me personally, I use this a lot in my personal life as well. I might set up the camera on a timer and then we'll go make some candid photos or something like that. So that is a really nice feature to have on here that you do not have on the Q. And trust me, I miss it all the time. That is something I definitely would love to have, but once again, not necessarily a deal breaker. You can get by with focusing it manually, but this is a little bit nicer. Now, another thing that the Q2 has going for it in the design department, it has a modified menu, which the Q menu is great. It's very simple. This one is also great, also very simple, but it has a refined front menu, which is very nice. Also, the Q2 has this button right here. So on your exposure comp dial, you can actually click a button up top, which allows you to change your ISO, or you can set this as a function button. Now, on the Q, you might be able to set this as an ISO button, but it doesn't really matter because they're both buttons. Whereas this, you just click it down, then you can move it, click it, save. It feels a lot more like a standard DSLR or any other camera, where this feels more like a point and shoot where you actually have to click the ISO button and then move throughout the menus. But aside from that, those are the big cosmetic differences on these two cameras. They both feel pretty much the same. The thumb grip is the same. The size is the same. The lens is the same. They're basically the exact same size. This lens has a little bit more like girth, I guess you would say, to the aperture ring right here, as well as the focus ring. The teeth on it are a little more sharp, a little more grippy, but once again, a small intangible, not necessarily the biggest deal. So with all that being said, where does this land us? Do you buy the Q? Do you buy the Q2? And it comes down to basically 2 simple questions. 1, do you need any of the features that I described on the Q2 that are not possessed by the Q? Do you need more resolution? Do you need the higher video? Do you need interval timer? Do you need the adjusted menus? Do you need any of this stuff? Also, one thing I forgot, weather sealing. The Q does not have weather sealing. You know, I've abused that before in videos. It would be nice to have the weather sealing of the Q2 so you don't have to worry about taking your camera out in the rain or anything like that. You can protect your investment a lot better. So do you need any of those things? Do you need higher resolution? Do you need more megapixels? Do you need video? Do you need weather sealing? If you need any of those things, it's obvious that you need the Q2. Now, if you can do without any of those things, the Q might be for you. So I know that's kind of an anticlimactic answer, but in reality, these two cameras are essentially the exact same camera with some differences. And if those differences matter to you, by all means, go for the newer one. Go for the Q2, get more resolution. But if those differences don't really matter to you, then there's no reason to spend all that extra money. Save yourself a little bit of money and probably go with a used Q. Now that does bring up the question of, do you want a used camera? Do you want to go the used route? If you don't want to, if that's something that sketches you out, you're not into it, then the obvious answer is right here. Be it the Q2. So y'all know how it goes on this channel. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm just going to give you my thoughts and my perspective on all this stuff. And I really think that you can still definitely get away with a Q. It's a great camera. Its files are a little bit smaller. They're easier to store. Your storage won't be as big of an issue. But I mean, who doesn't want some more megapixels? It would be great to have 50 megapixels. It would be great to crop. It'd be great for printing. Also, weather sealing would be great, but you do have to deal with the higher MSRP and also deal with the storage issues that come with larger files. So there's a lot to consider. And one other point that I don't know a ton about, but I've heard people talk about online, is the fact that because this has a higher resolution, there could be some issues with it in low light. I personally looked into this. I don't really think it's that big of a deal, but that's something you want to keep in mind as well. I love my Q for low light situations. Haven't really been able to test this Q2 very much, but everything I've read says it's still good, but it's not the greatest low light camera in the world. So that might be something you want to look into as well and keep in mind before making your big purchase. But for me, I think you can't go wrong with either one. It just falls into what characteristics you need in a camera and what you're willing to pay for. So thank you guys for watching. Hit that thumbs up, subscribe. Let me know your thoughts in the comments on these two cameras. Do you have either of them? Which one would you get? The Q2, the Q. See y'all next time.